Let's talk about leadership and change.
Don't start by going, what are we going to get rid of? Start by saying, what matters?
I think the biggest leadership problem in the American workplace.
We have been talking about this forever, and I honestly believe
Pat Lencioni is one of the world's top experts on leadership, organizational health, and teamwork. He's helped thousands of people transform their workplace by teaching them to focus on what truly matters: building trust, creating alignment, and driving results.
Elon Musk, what would he need to do to be successful?
Okay, I'm going to be daring here. The desire to be popular among the people you lead is a real dangerous thing. I can't believe that this guy who is doing all these different things wanted to do this. And I am so thankful to God that he does. And here's the deal.
What is the leadership attribute that Donald Trump has that has inspired unbelievable loyalty among his base?
I have the answer.
I can't wait. Tell me. Welcome to Front Row Seat. I'm your host, Ken Coleman. This show is about conversations that are designed to help you get better, move up, and then lead well. And in this room, anyone has the power to join the conversation, ask a question, and then we're going to see where the answers take us. Now, if you're enjoying this show, please make sure to let us know by liking and subscribing. Today, I'm so excited because our guest is not just an accomplished speaker, entrepreneur, best-selling author, and I think one of the great voices in all of the world on leadership. He's a friend and one of my favorite friends to talk to. He's an expert in organizational health and leadership development, but more importantly, he's a great American, a great husband, a great father, and a great friend. Please, everybody, help me welcome my pal, Pat Lencioni. Hey, man, welcome.
Great to be here.
So,
you didn't mention one other thing.
What should I have mentioned?
I live 4 blocks from you now.
You know what? That's true. I didn't know if you were weird about that. But
no, 2 weeks ago I moved here.
He did, and he's one street over.
You were the first person in Tennessee I went to visit.
Well, thank you. All right, so we have had a lot of conversations, and I'm more excited about this than anything we've ever talked about because in today's world, we are constantly bombarded with news stories. Yeah. And I think one of the things we as leaders sometimes fail to do is to find the nuggets of wisdom, the nuggets of failure in these massive leadership stories. So we're going to start off with leadership from the headlines.
Great.
And we're going to talk through what are we seeing?
Right.
What's right, what's wrong, what's missing? That's where we're going to go.
Right. And oftentimes the headlines are salacious.
Of course.
But it's fun to go one level deeper and say, but where does leadership and culture and truth and dignity fit into this?
So here we go.
Yeah.
We got to talk about LA burning. We look at Mayor Karen Bass. I look at that situation and my immediate thought was, this is a hands-off leader. She leaves for a scheduled trip, yes. The fires have already started. Massive warnings, and you know how quickly it happened. She still keeps her scheduled trip to leave the country. This is a hands-off leader. We start there. What is the lesson for leaders? Because I look at that, and my initial response, Pat, is what a stunning example of tone deafness we've got here. Like, you're just going to leave it to the fire department, and you're not thinking, as the chief executive of this city, I should probably be hands-on, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, the first thing, and I'm not prepped on all these things.
Right, no, this is all coming to you from the headlines.
The first thing I wonder is, like, why does a person run for a mayor of a city, a big city? Mm-hmm. And too often it's for fame and for power.
Yeah.
And frankly, it should be because you want to be responsible and actually do that. But so many people don't run for office because they want to run things well and be a leader for others. Very infrequently do people run for office because they're interested in rolling up their sleeves. So I'm going to jump to something that shocked me. Trump goes out there and sits down at a meeting with all these Congress people, local Congress people, fire, police, emergency services, and he ran that meeting like he was a project manager.
That's right.
I'd never seen him do this.
Yeah, I watched it live. I was astounded by it.
I was like, he's like going, no, it shouldn't take that long. Why don't you guys get together and solve this problem? Here's the problem. These people need to get in here. And I was like, oh, there's so much practical wisdom here. And you contrast that with most politicians. And I was like, I'd never seen him so on the ground doing things. And I could see why he built buildings.
Well, let's contrast that because she was sitting to his right, as you know. So his wife Melania is to his right, and Mayor Karen Bass is one seat over. And there was a particular moment where several questions were about, okay, how quickly can we get to our lots? And the problem, to set context, is people have lost everything, and they literally want to get to the lot that they own.
Yep.
And clean it so they can begin the process of deciding or rebuilding. And so he goes on, Trump questions her about it, and it illustrates your point. Her response was, I'm paraphrasing, it was, we need to make sure that it's safe. It's going to be about a week. We got to make sure it's safe. And she kept coming back to what I'm going to call a policy.
Right.
Someone had told her, this is what you say. This is how long it's going to take. A bureaucrat.
I remember that moment.
Do you remember the moment?
And I remember thinking what he was about to say.
Right.
Like, why a week?
Right.
There are people standing out front right now, like ready to go.
That's right.
And there was a bureaucratic rule. Before that, it was going to be 18 months.
That's right. So what's happening in her leadership mind that's wrong that we as leaders can go, okay, here's the more practical response? Because she's relying now on a bureaucrat policy instead of being in the moment going, wait a second.
Well, and I don't know for sure, but has she ever been in a practical leadership? I don't know what her background is.
I don't know her background either.
But I want to be very clear about something. This is not about partisan politics.
No, we're not talking
at all.
We're talking about a real situation of crisis.
Right. And so we shouldn't be defending people or condemning people, never as a person, because of their party. This is like, what should a leader do in that moment? You know what's interesting? Because I remember, and he said, no, tomorrow. We should get them out there tomorrow. And I was like, this is pretty bold. But that's the kind of thing, like, get it done. And there was like safety and everything. Well, it started raining 2 days later. And the new worry was, oh no, now it's going to be toxic runoff. So before it rains, let's clean this up. There's never a perfect answer, but if it's a lawyer or oftentimes a politician who's driving it, it's always what's not going to get me in trouble versus what's the right thing for these people. And did you notice the people in the audience who were the people that lived there would break out into applause when he said, no, let's get you out there now.
Right.
So
Pat, let me tell you what I see here, and I'm just curious your take on this. If we're contrasting Trump and Mayor Bass here, he is not afraid. Guy's got 4 years to make his mark. This is his second time around. He's also Trump, right? Yeah. So there's that personality and style, but there is no fear, regardless of his motive. She looks like she's full of trepidation, very cautious.
Remember when she got off that plane and she couldn't
same
speak?
Deal. She didn't know what to say. Yeah. So my question is, we're talking about crisis here and how leaders can manage the unknown and this unbelievable set of things have been thrust at you, yet you got to lead.
Right.
How much is fear driving it? To me, it seems like she is fearful, or any leader who just can't come up with a common sense solution is blinded by fear. Do you see that?
Yeah, well, it's so interesting you say that because in many ways, and I've come to realize this in my life recently and doing a lot of research, there's kind of only two motivators in life, and it's fear and love.
Yeah.
And love is offense. Like, no, we got to do the right thing. And I'm not going to worry about that. And fear is like, I mean, even like in life, you can play to avoid losing in a game or to win. Mm-hmm. Or you can do something out of passion and love for something or because you're afraid of failing. And there's plenty of leaders who succeed for a long time in fear of failure, but it's not a joyful thing. And they often don't make necessarily the right decisions. And I think when you get shot twice or people tend to kill you twice, he probably has a different perspective on like, what is he afraid of? And so I think he is going in, because he's different even than he was 5 years ago. He was in there like, no, we're going to do this.
So I was watching these headlines, I'm sure like many, and I'm going, okay, here's what I know the powers that be knew. They did know that they were in a drought. They did know that there was a ton of tinder in the form of dry brush. They know this. And yet it feels like in the aftermath of this, there was nobody thinking, what if? Again, I want to dive in for leaders here.
Do you remember Tylenol when there was the big Tylenol scare? We were kids and some people died.
Yes.
And it was and because they took Tylenol and the company, it was a big PR nightmare. Well, the CEO at the time, I mean, it was terrible. Imagine that he had been publicly warned 5 years before that happened. If you keep manufacturing with these ingredients, somebody's going to die. There's television clips of people saying, if you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. Any leader who is that negligent in their character and that makes a mistake that he'd been warned about, and so many people die and lose their homes. I'm a believer in grace and mercy and everything else, but you don't leave people in power who demonstrate those things.
What do you see as the source of that?
So I'm a follower of Jesus. That's my primary identity. And I look at this concept called sin, and we're all sinners. So I don't get to call somebody evil or condemn them. We all need mercy. But I do look at virtue, and the chief virtue is humility. And all the other virtues kind of come under that. And the chief vice is pride. And I lived there. The ego there is massive. And we have far too long tolerated ego in politicians. And what we need to look at is humility. Now, people would go like, well, is Trump humble? He is a doer. He is bombastic, and he's a Churchill leader, but it's about the results. And so humility isn't false modesty and timidity. It's like, I want to be judged by what we accomplish and what actually makes other people's lives better. So it's not a personality thing. I think so many of these ego politicians go on TV and pretend they're all into the people, but deep down inside, you see what they really are about.
I think there's only one way to deal with that. I think you've got to have people around you who are willing to stick their finger in your face. And we've seen this throughout history. We've seen in the Bible where you have an ego problem, or you are, but what happens is any leader, even a small businessman, if they only have yes people around them,
right,
and nobody to show them a mirror and say, hey,
I know.
It feels like that's the only shot a leader has at beating that if they're already an unhealthy ego.
Absolutely.
All right, let's go right here.
Yeah, so I think there's lessons to be learned, and as leaders, I think that we can make mistakes, and we can make big ones, right? And I think sometimes we get into this place of like self-serving. Leadership serves us and serves our needs, and we make decisions like maybe they're making currently to protect our ego, to protect that pride, to keep us safe. How do we move from that into selfless leadership?
So I hate to say this because it sounds self-promoting, but I actually wrote a book about this. It's called The Motive.
Okay.
And it's about, because for years I would talk to people in leadership positions, and I actually discovered this in a room like this, working with a bunch of leaders, and some of them were just like totally opposed to what I was saying, and I was talking to them. I realized the reason why they became leaders in the first place was not what I assumed. And when I go to a college graduation and people are like, go out there and be a leader, change the world, I want to stand up and go, no, not unless you have the right motive. And the two motives for leading are what? One is, it's about me. The other one, it's about them. And I know that sounds really simplistic, but if a leader is saying, I want to be the president of the United States, that's a bad thing. If your motive is because I care about the constituents and the people I lead, and if the most I ever become is the councilman of this town or councilwoman of this town or the mayor of this town, and I serve those people, that's great. So it's really tough to get through to a person like that. Because they're like, you don't understand. If I were vulnerable, that would hurt my chances. Totally. But if another person would go, look, I'll be vulnerable, I'll admit what I did wrong, and then we're much more likely to support them through that. So it gets back to that motive. And so that's what we have to ask ourselves. Why are they in this position at all?
I love what you brought up here. You brought the contrast of self-preservation to
That's
service.
the motive of me.
That's right.
Self-preservation.
And I thought this was a really insightful question, because I think what you're bringing up is there are times in every leader, even if you got the right motive. Right. I'm gonna throw this out.
We slide.
You get where I'm going. So we're in it for the right reasons. And I'm curious if that's where your question is coming from, that how do we guard against, or how do we flip back when here's what happens? And I'll take my shot at this.
In fact, that's a great question.
It's a great question, because you're here, I'm serving for the right reasons. Yeah. Then something happens. And let's call it something bad, where your livelihood or your reputation is now on the block, right?
100%, yeah.
So now you start going, what do I got to do about my reputation, instead of what do I have to do about my role?
You made a big mistake in a high stakes moment, and there's a lot on the line, and you recognize that your motive was out of line, that your intention maybe was right, but your motive was out of line.
That's $1 million question.
Well, the intention and the motive kind of go together, but I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know what I love about that book? It literally got published the week before COVID shut down.
That's right.
Not a great time to publish, but I'm having all these people like, all these people come to me and go, how come we never heard about this book? And well, there was this thing. But do you know how many people have called me and said, I read that book and I had the wrong motive? I have a checklist of 5 questions you should ask yourself. They're like, I was 0 for 5. And I changed my motive. I wanted to be a good leader, and I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I can tell you, as the guy who wrote the book, that I've gone through periods in my career where I slipped. I was like, well, I've achieved something. And now one of the things that we do is we just want to have fun. Yeah. It's like, no, it's not about your fun. It's about their best interests. So all of us can slip. A teacher of mine, Mr. Finucci in high school once said, God rest his soul, he said, nobody should ever be president who wants to be. I love that.
Mr. Finucci, dropping a dime on us.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, Vince Finucci.
No one should ever be president
that wants to be.
Interesting. That's a fabulous statement. Yeah. Could we take Mr. Finucci's statement and say no one should be a leader that wants to be?
Is that too
far?
That's too far, because if it wants to be famous, that wants to be powerful, that wants to be loved by strangers.
Right.
Trump is such an interesting cat.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even know how to characterize him.
Is he I was going to get to this. Is he a unicorn?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and yes. And we're in an interesting time. I saw a thing the other day, because I didn't even know who he was growing up. I just know there was this kind of really wealthy guy that had hotels and stuff.
Yeah, because when we were growing up, he was almost a well-known business guy. We'd see in the headline, or he'd show up on Oprah or Phil Donahue or Larry King.
Exactly.
That was his existence.
And he was a New Yorker, and that was a different world, and Atlantic City and all that stuff. You and I are the same. And then, so the other day, I watched this thing that showed an interview, like just a short interview with him every year for the last 50 years. It showed like what he was like when he was young, and like a little thing. And the evolution of him was crazy. And then he did The Apprentice. So to me, Donald Trump in 2015 was a game show host / celebrity / business tycoon with kind of a messy life and all this stuff. That's what I thought he was. When they were preparing the Republicans for that, I was like, well, that guy's not going to be president. The media liked him, though, because they wanted him to be
he gets eyeballs.
Yeah, and exactly. And they said, and if he becomes the nominee, we're going to tear him apart.
Of course.
And then he won, and all hell broke loose. Well, then I started watching him, and I thought, okay, we've elected this kind of cartoonish, interesting, good Trump, bad Trump, mostly kind of a little, I couldn't relate to him. But I was like all for him doing good things, but I didn't think good things were going to happen necessarily. Like, I wasn't like super hopeful that I preferred him to the alternative. And then he was doing things, I was like, and the point here is, God brings out good things from messy situations. I'm a believer in that. And all of us are flawed. And from our flaws, God will bring out good things. And hopefully we'll go, I'm flawed, I want to be better. So then he served his 4 years, and then spent the next 4 years just getting attacked. And I was like, I've never seen a person with this thick a skin. I mean, I could not imagine not giving up. And then he got the 2 assassination attempts, and something seemed to change in him. And suddenly I was like, I think this is a different person, because we all change. And now there's still kind of kookiness to him, but I see the substance underneath it, and I see the people around him, and I see the principles. I don't agree with everything he does, but a lot of it, I'm like, I think there's logic and virtue in that. And so I don't think there's ever been anything like this.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, because one of the things...
That was a long answer to, I think he is a unicorn.
Well, and to that end, you're really great at simplifying and kind of classifying things, I'm curious if you were going to try to label him as this, he's a really rare leader. How would you describe him in very few words? If you're observing him and you were teaching a leadership class, let's assume that, we'll put you there, Professor Lencioni, how would you describe his unique leadership style, maybe?
I would say it's a combination of like practicality. And people say business, but I think it's practicality, fearlessness, like this bizarre ability to offend somebody and not let it bother you, and then be nice to them afterward. Like, we've seen him say just horrific things to people. Right. I mean, Megyn Kelly was cheerleading for him at the election. Do you remember what he said to her?
It was awful, and he couldn't stand her.
And he would go, it was probably not very nice. Even in that press conference that we were talking about in LA, he was ripping into this Democratic guy that was like, well, what about this? What about this? He goes, nah, you're crazy. I don't believe the way you think. And then he go, well, maybe we can work together on this thing. Right. And so it's just a rare thing. I don't know if that's a New Yorker thing. No. I don't know if it's
his unique personality.
Yeah, but deep inside, what I've seen is there is a humility And I've seen a compassion for people and for ordinary people. Like, I keep hearing these amazing stories. People like, yeah, he saw me on the side of the road. I was changing my tire. He pulled over. I didn't have this. He paid for this. And it's like, so he is a unicorn.
I just think that he's driven by emotion.
Yes.
He's driven by conviction. And he's driven by legacy. As I've observed him, I think any given moment, he could be driven by emotion. All right? Meaning somebody says something about him, he goes after him, you're public enemy number one.
Yeah.
There are times where I see him driven by conviction, that he really believes something. It's a particular policy. So for instance, I'll give an example. We all know the emotion stuff. You could pick any public figure that's dared to criticize him or debate him or run against him.
Right.
Okay, we all get that. The conviction is tariffs. But this is a man that when he talks about tariffs, he's actually speaking from conviction. In other words, I believe that he actually thinks that those are great economic weapons.
Yes.
And then I would say, like us all, who we all have forms of ambition, I do think he's driven by legacy. He's accomplished a lot in his life.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of this is legacy as well.
Yeah.
And I think because those are now again, I may be wrong, but I'm actually—
I agree.
That makes him such a unique president in that we've rarely seen that combination.
And I don't know why, when I do disagree with him, why it doesn't bother me, because I think it's because he actually believes it. I think he actually believes it. Like when he does something, because there's the things he'll do, and I go, I don't think I believe in that. But he's like, I do, and that's okay. So the one thing I will say about him, he will admit when he's wrong. Not in the moment, but I've seen him change his stance on people.
Yeah.
And he is a unicorn, though.
Again, I want to caution our audience to make sure you understand what I'm driving at, what we're trying to talk about. Because I think we can learn something from any leader. Mm-hmm. We can learn good lessons, bad lessons, whatever.
Separate than the content of what they're doing, but their character.
That's exactly right. And I wonder, what is the leadership attribute that Donald Trump has that has inspired unbelievable loyalty among his base? And I think that is a leadership question, not a political question. If you're going to lead a company—
I have the answer.
I can't wait. Tell me.
It's authenticity. We crave it. There's people that don't even, because like, wow, I don't even know how to, like, he's like, the unions like him. Well, I never grew up being like a union guy, but now I understand why he is. And he's pulled me along a little bit. But what I do know is this: he's not phony. And I tell you what, the thing about politicians and any leader that we hate is inauthenticity. And which is why, if I did one little thing in the White House, not for him, but for a different thing, and I know some people that were close to him, and I did some work with them. And if I were working with him, man, I wake up every morning with a pit in my stomach, like, what's he gonna do today?
Right.
But I do know this: whatever he did, he mean it.
Right.
And I think I'd go to him and go, "You shouldn't have done that." He'd go, "Well, the guy's a loser."
Yeah, right.
But you're not supposed to say that.
Right.
And so there's something about authenticity that I think, in a world where people are used to commercials that aren't real and politicians that aren't real, and even CEOs these days, they say the thing you're supposed to say. And that's why, you know who is another guy that I think is fascinating? I could watch this guy be a food critic, is Dana White at the UFC.
Yeah. No holds barred, says exactly what he's thinking.
I don't agree with him sometimes.
Yeah.
But I'm like, he really means it, and I can respect that. I would prefer a person come up to me and say, I don't like you, Pat, and here's why, and here's what I think. I could actually deal with that. A person that comes up to me and kisses up, but I know deep down inside they don't feel that way, that is untenable to me.
Yeah.
That scares me.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. You've probably heard people talk about different kinds of flags in relationships: red flags, green flags, even beige flags. It's hard enough to keep track of what they're all supposed to mean, much less keep them in mind when you're trying to balance relationships with health, family, and work. So here's a tip. Don't waste time on arbitrary labels. Just focus on the values you share with the people in your life. Stuff like faith, honesty, communication, and work ethic. And if you're not even sure what your values are, therapy can help you figure them out. To find what you're looking for in your relationships and decide your non-negotiables. That's why I recommend BetterHelp. BetterHelp is 100% online therapy with licensed therapists. That means you can talk with your therapist when it's convenient for your schedule. Just fill out a short online survey to get matched with a therapist. Plus, you can switch providers at any time for no additional cost. So whether you're dating, married, finding friends, or just working on yourself, do it with help from BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/Ken to get 10% off your first month. That's betterhelp.com/Ken. All right, let's go to a question back here.
Yeah, so I'm trying to put together these virtues that you've been talking about. How do you stay humble without being submissive? And how do you be authentic and make decisive decisions without just like steamrolling people and being a jerk?
Okay, I think I can answer this.
You know what
I
I'm
love
saying?
this question.
Yeah.
So I'm going to get kind of practical here, like deep on the ground. So you're making a decision and you're humble, but you're a leader.
Yeah.
You listen to the people around you. So you say, so literally, like, we have to make a decision. Is it A, B, or C? And as a leader, I go, I like A. But I want to know what you think. Or maybe I have an opinion. I'm not even going to say it yet because I want to know what you guys think, and then we'll figure it out. And I listen to everybody. I'm not humoring you. I'm not saying I've already made up my mind, because I actually am humble enough to realize somebody might have a better idea. So we go through it, and then I go, okay, now I feel strongly about this. And I believe it's B. What do you guys, let's keep talking. And we talk more. At the end of that meeting, as the leader, I have to be humble enough to listen to you, but bold enough to say, I really believe it's B, and we're going to do it, even if it doesn't please you.
I like that, because sometimes I get stuck in analysis paralysis where I'm trying to get confirmation, and because I think I'm afraid to make the decision.
And make the wrong decision.
Yeah.
Now, so humility says I need to listen because all people are deserving and have human dignity and they have good ideas. But the bold part says, but at the end of the day, I have to be accountable for making the decision.
Right.
And you know what's funny? When you do that, when you actually listen to people and then you make a decision that they don't agree with, they actually they will help you implement it as long as they were heard. See, they don't have to agree with everything. It's like what we were talking about before. It's like, if I understand how you got there and I know you listened to me, I'll support you. But when you didn't listen to them and you just come in and you go, we're going to go with plan A, you might have other opinions, support me on this. They don't support.
Right.
They alligator arm it. Do you know what that is? They're like, oh, let me help with that. They don't really help.
Yeah.
So that, I like what you said. Humility isn't about submissiveness or let's all vote.
Right.
It's about saying, I'm going to listen to you and then I'll be bold. And people will follow a leader who does that through walls of fire.
Absolutely. I want to add to this. I once heard a pastor preach on this issue, that once you've gotten the feedback, like Pat just laid out, and everybody's weighed in, and you have a pretty good sense what is right. He preached on Nehemiah. When Nehemiah in the Old Testament, the walls of Jerusalem are in destruction and destroyed. And he comes in and sees it, and he goes to all the elders and leaders, and he says, we got a massive problem, all right? And it's the walls are torn down. So if you're in this situation, you've got to make a decision. It is a solution of some form, right? So everybody knows what the problem is or what we're trying to solution. So Nehemiah comes in and he goes, we got to build the wall. And he says, this is what we're doing. And then he says, this is why. So here's the problem.
Yes.
The wall is torn down. Here's the solution. Rebuild it. But here's the key thing. He says the reason for this is to restore Jerusalem to its glory. So this preacher starts walking through this as 3 parts. Define the problem. And everybody gets in the room and we all agree, we definitely need to do something. Reveal the solution. That's after you've got all the feedback, but give them the reason for the solution. Now at this point, this is vision casting.
Yes.
And this is Andy Stanley's book, Visioneering. It's a brilliant book. I highly recommend it to leaders on vision casting because that's what has to happen.
And it's rooted in humility.
That's absolutely right.
They have the dignity to know why.
Right.
Versus build the wall because I say so.
That's exactly right.
Build the wall because I said so. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
I hope that helps. But I would get that book, Visioneering. And I just think it's such a masterclass, and because that's what leaders are. I got to share this. I heard a story once. I believe it was Dwight Eisenhower, famed World War II general, and he becomes president. And I can get fact checked on this, but this is how the story was told to me. That one time somebody asked him, I don't know if it was a reporter or someone in the White House asked him to define leadership. and he opens up a desk drawer in the Oval Office and pulls out a piece of twine, thicker rope, about that long. And he said, "This is not leadership." And he pushed it with his finger, and what did it do?
Yeah, it didn't
Cinched
work.
up, kind of got all squirrely. He goes, "This is leadership." And he put his finger on it and he pulled it.
Right.
I think there is something to, well, people will follow you even if they're not sure you're right. But if there is that authentic process by which they realize you're in leadership, they acknowledge that's a tough role.
Yeah.
You've heard them, but they know it's on somebody.
Yeah.
And they respect the fact that you're willing to go, "This is what we're doing. Are you coming with me?"
Bring them along.
That's it.
But that's not soft.
No.
You know, and then sometimes you go, "I'm going to bring you along." You don't want to go there. That's okay. And I'll just cut that little end of the thing off, and I won't treat you poorly. If you don't want to come along with this, I've listened to you.
Yeah.
See, that's also humility. To say maybe it's not for you.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about leadership in change. And I think the number one story in the headlines right now about leadership and change has got to be Elon Musk and Doge. The whole concept of the Department of Government Efficiency, for those of you, who don't know what we're talking about. It was in the headlines big time. And now here we are. It's still early as we sit here today, but we've got a very eccentric billionaire coming in going, the government needs to be more efficient. And so I'm bringing up change because certain leaders tend to be more open to change. Like they dig it. They thrive off of it.
Right.
And a lot of leaders seem not to be too excited about it. So
I think
now,
it's the fear and love
it's
thing
fear.
again.
So let's go to this. I think we can learn from this. And I can't wait for your observation. You got Elon Musk, the entrepreneur's entrepreneur. Does whatever he wants, whenever he wants. He's going to Washington, D.C., and he's attempting to change the bureaucracy.
Right.
What would he need to do to be successful, to fight that?
He cannot try to be popular. The first book I ever wrote was called The 5 Temptations of a CEO. Yes. And the desire to be popular among the people you lead is a real dangerous thing. Because then what you'll do is you'll just do the things that people are going to reward you for. And in Washington...
That's the currency.
Right. And so he has to go in there and know he's going to displease a lot of people. That doesn't mean you go in there and go, I'm just going to make people mad on purpose. He is going to make a lot of people mad, and he has to be prepared to do that. I can't believe that this guy who is doing all these different things wanted to do this.
Yeah.
And I am so thankful to God that he does. And here's the deal. Love them enough to say this is going to be hard for you, but it ultimately will be in your best interest.
That's right.
But if you're the kind of politician who just wants votes or wants approval, and I've done this in my career. I've let people get off because I wanted to be nice, and I didn't serve them. And so I think what Elon Musk is doing is really virtuous, and he's going to have to be courageous in doing this. Now, I hope, and I am volunteering my services to them. They don't know that, but
right.
What I do is I help organizations understand where there's dysfunction. Because if you can go into an organization and see where the dysfunction is, it's a lot easier to weed out the problems without, throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Now, there's a ton of bathwater.
Oh, yeah.
But there's babies in many of these departments. Some of the departments should just go away. But some of them would do good things, but they've just gotten out of control. So I'm hoping at some point we can help them look at these things from an organizational health standpoint so they know where to cut without hurting the core.
If you're going in and Elon calls you up today and he goes, all right, Pat, pick an agency. Let's take the national education. Let's go education, okay?
Yeah.
You don't know much about it. You walk in day one, knowing the way you operate, your strengths and all of your experience.
I love this question.
Great. What is your mindset that morning, the night before, in the car? You got all this experience. This is not a new thing yet. A very different world. How are you approaching that?
Don't start by going, what are we going to get rid of? Start by saying, what matters? In other words, because if you play defense and you're like pulling it one hair at a time off, it's going to take you forever. Actually go in and say, what's the 10%, the 15% that matters most? And then build from there. And then you're going to get to 30% of this matters. The other 70% doesn't. So start with that. Find what's good. Don't just look for the bad.
Let's talk a little bit about leadership and values. So out of the headlines, these two stuck out to me. Zuckerberg and Facebook a full, let's call it, turn. And now we're going to allow free speech. We're not going to monitor and edit and, block. And that was met with massive, massive headlines. And another major headline was, of course, Bezos, the other billionaire at Amazon, takes over the Washington Post and stunningly, a week before the election, sends down word the Washington Post is not going to endorse a candidate.
Right.
And these created massive headlines. Most of Americans
LA Times did that too.
Yeah, they followed suit.
Yeah, I think of what Reagan said about trust but verify. I mean,
Exactly.
We should be suspicious.
I mean, were you suspicious as well as I was?
Oh, of course, because these were the people that were actually driving the shutdown of the First Amendment.
Right.
I mean, they were the paragons of not free speech.
Right. And now they're on the second row in the rotunda.
I know. I was like, wow. Now, here's what I will say, because you take these one by one. Zuckerberg is an interesting cat. I mean, I was never a big fan of his. Not a big fan of his. You know what? He may have had a change of heart. Maybe had. And again, trust but verify. Don't assume.
Okay.
Do you know why? This is crazy. We talked about this before. Do you know who he's been hanging out with a lot in the last 2 years?
Dana White.
Dana White and all the UFC fighters.
Who, by the way, if you're watching and listening right now and you're not aware of this, they tend to be very pro-Trump, very
really
anti-government.
And like down-to-earth, hard work.
Yeah, very pro-America.
Yes. Even the ones that are foreign.
Right.
That come here and train, they're like, no.
Right.
And he's been with them. And so they're training hard. And UFC is one of those things. Some people watching this probably think UFC's crazy. When I first saw UFC, I thought, this should be illegal. Let me tell you, I watch a lot of UFC now. You know why?
I watch it all the time.
The people that do it are really principled. And you know what I love about it? You'll talk to my friends, my wife's friends will come over and I'll be like, and they're like, what are you watching this for? And they'll be bleeding. And I'll go, watch. And the fight's over. Yeah. And they go over and they hug each other or they pray together. And and it's like, they just beat the crap out of each other. And they love on each other. That gets me. Yeah. So he's been hanging out with these guys, including Dana White. And I think Joe Rogan also.
Yep.
I think his transition has been a lot of these guys.
But I will tell you, I think his is genuine. Because
I do too.
Here's a guy who just has been asking questions and digging for years, and you've watched him ask enough questions to where the answers make him go, I think well, let me put it this way. From a distance,
yes,
I would believe his transition or transformation on his views far more than I would Zuckerberg or Bezos.
Oh, of course, because we've seen it play out over time.
I think there's evidence.
I'm not even comparing them.
No, I know.
When you're in that environment.
But you think that they've had an influence on Zuckerberg?
Yes, because he put Dana White on his board. I mean, Dana White's going to be sitting in that room, and he's going to go, what the hell is going on?
Right.
Because he has no other way to do it.
Right.
So I hope it's real.
Yeah.
That's my only hope. But would I trust it? No.
I don't either. Because I would say that makes me feel like it's a publicity play. If I was Mark Zuckerberg and I was doing this, I go, who could I put on my board?
Well, exactly. Well, what I'm going to see is, what I want to see is, so are you going to go back and undo this and undo this and undo this and undo this?
That's right.
We will see. The proof will be in the pudding.
That's right. That's where we begin to see principle over
Absolutely.
profit.
And I hope that's true. Bezos was an interesting one. I mean, I don't know what drives these super rich people.
Right.
I don't know how many houses and yachts and things you can have. And I don't think it's money. I actually think it's insecurity and pride and fame and all those other kinds of things. But so we'll see. We'll see how that plays out. Trust but verify. Trust but verify isn't right. It's like be suspicious or skeptical, but try to allow them to get there, but make sure you're verifying that stuff. And I hope it's real. We're learning things now about things that people knew, and when they spoke up, they got their livelihoods taken away. Some put in prison, some just taken off the internet. Some their businesses weren't. Some couldn't do banking.
Yeah.
And I think that we can never ever let the First Amendment get sacrificed again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people like Zuckerberg and Bezos are part of that.
I want to talk about one more kind of from the headlines here, diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's in the headlines right now, of course, because Trump is now coming at it in the government ranks.
Right.
It's this is a big deal on the left. But again, we're going to stay out of the right, wrong, and we're going to look at it as an actual policy. And you're a guy that has worked with the biggest companies in America on organizational health. And I look at it and I go, the question I have for you is, it feels like this is a failed leadership solution for the simple fact that it is a checking of the box that props some people up. It doesn't actually help those people.
Yeah.
It props them up.
Right.
Am I off?
No, you're
And if
right. I love this because I've been in the diversity business for 28 years. I've had a company for about that long. And we work with executive teams and companies, and it's like, understand your strengths, understand what makes you different. Why do you have a different perspective? We have been talking about this forever. And people use words, and they're like, well, how can you be against this? It's like, well, DEI is not that. DEI was not like truly about finding the best in people and raising, it was about checking off boxes.
Let's talk about the fact that CEOs go along with it because of the social pressure from their boards, the media. I mean, this happened.
Yeah.
So then they make it happen, Pat, and then they look at it as it actually begins to be implemented in their organization. I gotta believe, and this is a guess, and I think you know the answer. What does it do to a team? The policy itself, forget the politics of it. I just gotta believe it's awful.
Well, so I love this. So let's play this out.
Okay.
It gets back to that First Amendment thing, because so much of these principles apply to organizations and apply to society. If people don't speak up, they're oppressed and bad things happen. I was talking to my wife about this recently, and she said, and you know what they do? They go off and they do underground things that are not productive. Because people should have been able to go to a company and go, hey, this DEI program we're doing, hey, you have to understand it's offensive to me, or we're doing this and that's not good for these people, and it's leading to this, and can we talk about this? You couldn't do that. If you could have done that, and there could have been like a real dialogue, we probably would have figured out how to do it well. Similarly, if people really think people are being discriminated against based on their race or their gender, they should be able to walk into the office and go, I think we don't have people like in this room today, there's no women. That was just like, we got all the people to come to this. And it's like, I said to you when I walked in, where's all the ladies? It's all dudes. They're like, well, we pulled these people together. We didn't have any. There's other women in the room on the crew. We should talk about these things. And if a company thinks that they're actually not giving opportunities to people because of their race or their religion or their gender, then let's talk about that and fix that. But let's not put together a program that is solidifying unfairness in any direction. By the way, I'd be so angry if I was consulting to or working at a company that was discriminating against, soft or hard discrimination against people of gender, race, anything.
Sure.
That would piss me off. And I've lived my whole life that way. And then I get into my late 50s and suddenly it doesn't matter that you believe that just by the virtue of the color of your skin. You're probably, you know what I mean? It's like, this is crazy, man.
Yeah. And so I don't think most people realize there's a great difference between equity and equality.
Oh, yeah.
I think we got to discuss that.
Oh, yeah.
And so
equality of outcomes is communism.
Yeah.
Not really, pure communism.
Right. Equality's great. That's the virtue.
Equal opportunity,
yes,
equal access.
But equity
no.
is a very different word.
Yeah.
And
Did you notice that I said diversity and inclusion? I skipped over that one.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I want us to unpack that because I want to make sure that we have we have leaders and we have high performers listening, watching. We need to understand the difference. And I want your take on it. I know what the difference is, but we've thought that we hear diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think most of us let that run right over. So we go, oh, yeah, it's equality. No.
Yeah. And if I think equity means the right thing, but nobody knows what that means, right? That's what you're saying.
Well, yeah.
We think it's equal outcomes, which is like, well, you go like, okay, if all these students apply to the school, the merit is the thing. It's like equal access and then merit-based decisions about everything from pay to access to schools and everything like that. Yeah. So you probably know more about this.
So my take is this, that equity is referring to everybody. Do we have this right equity of this amount of people, this type of person? It has nothing to do with equality. It's all about numbers.
Oh.
Yeah, so equity defined is
fair and impartial.
Fairness and impartial. But here's the deal. The very program of DEI is not fair and impartial. It is now I'm going to call it a program. It is a program that you must follow. And so now the very thing that was meant to promote fairness is actually not fair at all. And to your point, meritocracy, right. Oh, there's a dirty word for a lot of people. It's one of my favorite words.
Yeah, it's coming back now.
It is coming back.
And it should be. And you know what's amazing? This is the thing that gets me is when I meet and I meet many people of a race that's a minority, like African American or Hispanic or Asian, or a woman that believes in meritocracy and hates what's going on in DEI, they're hated the worst. When they oppose it, they get more pushback and anger than anyone from that 15%.
Yeah.
And because it doesn't really serve them. They're like, could you please Martin Luther King was, what a great line. I dream for the day when people will be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin.
Right. That's exactly right.
And I'm like all back for that.
Right. All right. So let's talk, just because this is such a big issue, as leaders begin to see the Trump administration kind of taking the lead out on this. You've talked about a lot of CEOs that are going, this doesn't work organizationally from an organizational health standpoint. It creates all this, it's got to create a lot of weird junk in the hallways.
Oh.
How do you, as a leader who wants to see a diverse or promote it, what's the right way? What's the healthy way to take on that issue without making it this program and a decree?
Yeah, go to the purity of the concept underneath it and say, if we are being unfair and if there are good people that should work here or that should get promoted, and we believe that they're not getting hired or they're not getting promoted for any reason outside of their contribution to the company, it's like, let's double down on our opposition and anger about that. So I think that we should actually say, we want true diversity, true merit. Merit takes care of all of this. Because if somebody's not getting a job promotion or an opportunity because of the color of their skin, that's a massive violation of merit. We should go back and say the true underlying principles behind this are fairness. And as a follower of Jesus, that it is untenable that we allow that to happen. You don't create another thing that's worse. And there's a small group of people that will go, yeah, but I want it to be worse because I want to punish people from the past. It's like, that never leads to good things going forward. So I'm all for access and thinking, and I do that. I'm always thinking about so how can we reach out and do all these things, but never at the expense of merit, never at the expense of what you're trying to produce, because that hurts everybody. So let's just recommit to our underlying anger about any true discrimination that's going on, but not cover it up with another kind that we think that we have to support. And I don't know, maybe even that is politically incorrect. I don't think it is so much today, but it shouldn't be.
All right, so I want to talk about what I think is one of the major issues, I think the biggest leadership problem in the American workplace. This comes from unique perspective. I've coached 10,000 people.
Yeah, I can't wait to hear it.
Who were leaving leaders in my previous show. And I was on a leadership podcast recently. They asked me, what do you think is one of the bigger issues? And I said, well, I'll tell you what I think has to be in the top 3. And it comes from this clip. And this is me sharing some data and then an opinion. And this is about micromanagement. We'll get to it, but I want you to watch what I said. And this had, let me look at this, make sure I get this right. 11.7 million views, thousands of comments on Instagram. I stepped into it. Here's what I said, and I want to know what you think. Micromanagement is a deadly leadership trait. This is a leader who's terrified, petrified, and because of their fear, they are trying to answer their fear with control. They don't trust the employees they lead because they are so afraid, and they just cannot let go. They are holding on for dear life. This is white knuckle management, and this turns into spying on people, creating crazy policies. You see some of these traits on a consistent basis. This ought to be a big-time red flag for you.
Wow. By the way, you look awesome there. You're very tan, very handsome. I was like, who is this guy? Wow.
Well, I think that must have been Phil when I had been playing a lot of pickleball outside, summertime. That took off, and we were sitting there as a team going, whoa. And the comments about that were 98%. You're absolutely right. And they begin to tell stories of leaders who just constrict their freedom.
So but what the beauty of what you did right there is you didn't just talk about micromanagement, you talked about why people do it. It's fear and the need for control. They're insecure. Because micromanagement is one of those people that say, oh, you're micromanaging me, but why do people do that? Because they're afraid. And I like that you hit that on there. There's a reason people do that is because they're like, oh no, it's like leading out of fear versus love. And if you ask them, like, well, what's wrong with that person? Give them some rope. Let them try things. Let them fail. They're like, oh no, but it might make me look bad. It gets back to the motive and all those things. So I totally agree with you that is one of those things. But what's underneath that is what I find fascinating. And what's underneath that is something that I've recently been looking at, and that's wounds. And like in the last year, I've been giving talks, and people say, what's the next book you're working on? And I never write a book just to write a book, but there's something that I've been really interested in, and that's the wounds of leaders. And I've been looking at it myself. And why do we micromanage people? Because we're afraid. Why are we afraid? Because we fear failure. We thought, if I fail, I don't know how to recover from this. I'm never enough. I was rejected or ashamed. And so you hit that is the iceberg coming up above. It's like micromanagement is a problem. Now let's go teach a manager, do you know why you're micromanaging these people? And do you know it's not working? And some of them go, I know it's not working. They're leaving, but I can't stop. And they can't stop because they need to look a little deeper at why they do the things.
Oh, you nailed it. You nailed it. They can't stop because they don't know how to solve it, because they don't even actually know what the real problem is. You know, I try to remind people that bad leaders aren't bad people all the time. In fact, I would say most of the time.
Oh, no, it's
from
very
my
rare that
experience,
it's somebody that's just like.
Wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
But I think the workforce goes nuts. They respond to this and it goes viral.
Yes.
And they're like, and you can feel the anger. If I scrolled through that reel and showed you the comments, it would really break your heart, because there's real anger from workers who've been hurt by these, but they think that this leader is a bad person. And I think you nailed it. They're broken.
Yeah. And you know what's bad is because then when they do is they go, that leader's a bad person. They go, oh, I've done it too. I'm a bad, you know what I mean?
Right.
And that's why grace is so important.
Yeah.
We need to go. But grace, love requires grace and truth.
Right.
So like if you're my leader and I love you and you are hurting me and I go, oh, I'm going to let them off the hook. I'm not going to tell them. That's not love.
Right.
Because it leaves you there. Or if I go to you and I go, you're a jerk, and I have no grace for you, that's not love, that's cruelty. You need both, grace and truth.
You are right, and I agree with you. There is pain from their past that is creating the fear.
Oftentimes they got to that place by doing that. See, we have these maladaptive coping mechanisms, and when you're in high school and college and your first job, being a micromanager is probably pretty good because you don't leave anything to chance.
Right.
And then you go, hey, this works for me. I'm not happy doing it. I'm afraid. I mean, that's what's happened to me in my life. But I look now like, why have I been so successful? And there's a lot of different, God's given me gifts and opportunities, but I've also grew up with a never enough. And most of the high achievers.
You were not enough?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, dude.
And one failure sends me to oblivion.
Well, it takes me back to this narrative.
Do you know how many athletes, CEOs, politicians, high achievers, people in this room, especially you? No, I just But do you know how many people's success is built upon what we would call a maladaptive coping mechanism?
I would say it's massive.
Exactly. And what we need to realize is we need to step back and go, I can undo that. Therapy, personal coaching, all those things, without threatening my ability to contribute. But so many people, I mean, think about these athletes that go, but I've always done it this way. And so I can't stop now. And so I think micromanagement is actually a maladaptive coping mechanism for people who said, I can't fail. And so even when people are walking out the door going, you're a micromanager, and they're like, yeah, I'm going to hire some more people and micromanage them too.
Isn't that true? And I'm going to, you and I have been very transparent and authentic, and I'm happy to stay here. I thought what you just said is really good, but I'm going to take a variation of that. I think some leaders are going, I'm micromanaging and controlling because I am a failure. I've been a failure, and I don't want, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's also because I'm going back to this pain thing to where they're going, I've got this narrative that I'm not good enough or whatever, and I can't let that keep happening, and they're trying to stop that from happening. Like, it's happened enough. Does that make sense? I'm not trying to reword what you said. I'm trying to go a little deeper to go, we're so worried that what we feel about ourselves or what we think other people think about us is actually true, and we try to control it.
Yes.
I think that's it.
I just figured out it's the noun versus the verb. They think I'm not good.
There it is.
And so what I do determines who I am. And so you're right. They think like, I am a failure. I'm not good. I'm better perform.
Hey, I want to show you really quick. I wrote this down. I was scribbling a minute ago. And this is what my therapist literally yesterday's session, because I'm resonating with what you're saying.
Yeah.
And it's do, be, have. In other words, that's been the rhythm of my life. You talk about high performers.
What you do is who you are in order to get stuff.
That's right.
Versus
He
who you
flipped it.
are leads to what you do.
He goes, be, do, have, not do, be.
Yeah.
Right? And so I've struggled with that.
It gets to identity.
Well, yeah. Listen, this comes from a conversation in a tense moment with my dad when I'm 14 and I'm bringing bad grades home. He's a good dad. But he looks at me and goes, you keep these grades up and you're going to pump gas the rest of your life. Now you got to understand, I'm 14, so that's 1988. Some of these people are watching, go, pump gas? What? But back in those days, there were guys at a service station, a gas station, that would pump your gas to give you the option. And that was considered the lowest rung of the ladder. And we've now traced that hurt me deeply. And I'm sharing this. You take it where you want to.
Yeah.
But I think it speaks to what you were talking about with these athletes and what drives them. What has been driving me is I said to myself, I respected my dad, so I didn't mouth off. But I said, I'll show you.
Right.
I'm bringing it back to our, you got a leader who is, you're dealing with that's my narrative.
Right.
I'll show you.
And just for those people watching, I think more and more people are doing therapy these days, and much of it is good. Some of it's not, because if we're not, sometimes you go to a therapist and they go, well, this is what I do, and I'm going to do this with you. And it's like, I don't know if that's what I need. But therapy's not soft.
It's the hardest work I've ever done in my life.
My Lord. The last 4 months of my life have been the hardest.
Yeah.
And so great.
Yeah.
And so painful. And God is good. And
I did not know that.
Yeah, I know. We have to have a talk because I just moved here. So I'll give you my little quick story. And I share this not because, I want everybody to know about me, because other people might hear this and go, I can relate to
That's
that.
my hope. Yeah.
Or, well, if he's successful, actually looking at this stuff doesn't threaten that. Okay. So for mine was when I was 4 and 5 years old and earlier, before I even have memories, and multiple people I've worked with have helped me figure this out. I just didn't get what I needed from my folks. And my parents, it was because they didn't get what they needed. They meant well.
That's right.
But there were some pretty severe things I didn't get. And when you don't get those when you're really young, this is called complex PTSD. When you don't get those when you're really young, you have to find a way to survive. And so mine was just like, I will please everybody in my family, all my teachers, all my coaches, anybody, and I'll be perfect. So I'll just go for perfection. And so I did in everything. I tried to please everybody in my family. I tried to get straight A's. I always tried to make the team. I tried to be the president of this and president of that. And every step along the way, I thought, well, this will be the last one. And at age 57, I was like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. Exhausted.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hypervigilance, never feeling enough.
Yeah.
And you think you're going to earn love that you can never earn.
That's right.
You missed out on that.
Right.
And they've tried their best. They didn't know. And so a lot of my achievement was out of fear. And I finally discovered that, and I've been getting help with it. And hey, better to do it now than never. And I want other people to actually go, hey, why am I doing this? Why am I working so hard? Why am I so afraid of one of my employees letting down? Why am I so afraid of my boss not giving me that thing? It's because something often happened really young.
That's right.
And in my case, it went on for 18 years.
Yeah.
And so that became my operating system.
Yeah.
And I'm rewriting it right now.
Yeah, that is. I'm so glad you shared that, because that is really the case.
Yeah.
We all have an operating system,
Oh.
and many times it's not very good.
And
Thanks for
there's-
sharing that.
Sure.
I love that.
And I hope there's people sitting out there, however old they are, going, wow, I think there's something underneath. Because if you don't have peace
Yeah.
and you're working hard, I'm successful, but I don't have peace. I mean,
Yeah.
and this is what we said before about these people that are really rich. Like, how many yachts or boats or houses can you have? It's not about that. It's not greed. It's usually a wound underneath that says, I'm never enough.
That's exactly right. And they just keep piling on. Yeah. To wrap this part up, I've said this many times before. I think that a self-aware leader is a super leader.
Yes.
Because if you are truly self-aware,
And vulnerable about that. Yes.
that's right. But if you're really self-aware, you have the chance, let me put it that way, to be a super leader.
Yeah.
But I think that, again, this micromanagement topic is somebody who's just not aware of what you pointed out, which is a much deeper surface issue.
You know the motive book I talked about before?
Yeah.
So let's just say your motive is right. It's to serve others. But you know what I figured out about myself? I was serving others. So I had the right motive. But underneath that was the motive of I would be terrified of them not being happy.
Yeah. Oh,
So you can even be a great leader, but you're doing it out of fear of rejection, and eventually it catches up with you.
that's exactly right.
So there's the motive, and then there's the motive underneath it.
Yes.
It's informed by our
Oh,
wounds.
so true. That's good. Okay, right here in the front row.
So you've been talking love and fear, and how that, those are kind of the two sides of the pendulum, and how this fear and this hurt builds success. A lot of hurt in my childhood led to a lot of fear. Multiple years of true homelessness as a kid, came from true poverty, and it's funny, I didn't realize that my childhood was, as my wife and my therapist call it, traumatic. I just thought this was how you did life.
In fact, it was like, you're tough because
Right.
you got out of that self-made.
Right. And I took that into my adulthood, into my marriage, into raising kids, and went, I can be successful. My kids won't have that life. And I got really good at making a lot of money and being really unhappy. I'm not leading my wife well. I'm not leading my kids well. I'm not leading my team well. If this is what it takes, that never would have been God's design. And in a lot of therapy, we've really changed course to going, all right, I'm going to pursue what the Lord has for me, and we're going to walk with him. And in that, in pursuing love, out of love, I find now that leads to more uncertainty. That's starting to rear the head of fear in my spouse, in my staff, in the people around me that for a long time have looked to me to be that solid leader.
Oh, wow.
And I wonder, how do you transition and care properly for the people looking to you when you've made that transition?
So I love this question.
Yeah, I do too.
So I'm going through this. I've realized this too. So imagine that you had a bad hip, right? A horrible hip, and for years you were in a dance. You danced with your wife, with your staff, with your kids, everybody else, and then finally you're like, this hip is terrible, and you finally get it fixed. And then you go to dance with them. Well, you've adjusted how you dance, and they're gonna be like, what are you doing? Like, I'm not in pain as much, and they're gonna be like, but we were used to that.
Right.
So what's this uncertainty that you're going through, and it might very well be that you're actually okay with the uncertainty, but other people were used to dancing with you in a way that they knew how to do. And it's hard because then you think, oh, maybe it was better when I had that bad hip because they knew how to deal with me. It wasn't.
Right.
So just know that you're going to have to learn to dance. I mean, I'm going through this right now with my staff and with my wife and with my family. It's like, no, I'm just healing. And that's going to be different for you too. And I'm not indifferent to that.
Right.
But here's the other thing I want to say. Don't give in to the lie that all the things you did before this were bad.
Right.
Because you served your wife and your kids and your staff well, and they got good things out of that.
Right.
And now that you're doing this, it's really tempting to go, oh, everything from before was just terrible. It's like, no. You did do things for your kids that exceeded what you got. You were a husband to your wife in a really good way, and you did, but there was wounds in there influencing that, and now you can fix those. So don't give in to that lie, but just know it's going to take a while for them to get used to dancing with a healed man.
Right.
My question is, can you identify anything you've said or done that has created this fear in them? Because you're going through the transformation. They're not. They're observing. I'm just wondering if you can be honest and vulnerable. Yeah. Have you done something, said something that has created this fear in them of what's next?
Oh, absolutely.
What would you say that is?
I don't do things quietly. So just like in boldness, right? Professionally, right? In kind of the real estate arena, everything had been about finding those people that you can connect with and what they can do for you. And when you take that approach to go, the culture of our industry on a professional level is filthy, and we're going to attack that now, to go and approach it the way that it was intended to be approached of, I'm here to give to you. I'm gonna build the equity. I'm gonna give it away freely. And I'm gonna not keep score with you.
And they're like, well, we might not sell as many houses or whatever it is you do.
That's exactly what's happening.
And that's okay.
Right.
It's hosting events in our office that aren't targeted just at if you're in this niche because you might find me valuable to send stuff our way, and going, this applies to anybody in a business of this size. So we just want you all to come in because if you're better off, then our community's better.
And this is where letting them into your process of healing is actually not selfish or needy. It's actually helpful because they can reinterpret this. My wife said something really interesting. She said, do you know, Pat, when you're healing, the people around you are going to notice that, and it's going to raise issues for them about their healing, and they might not be ready for that.
Right.
And that means like,
that's right.
That's their thing.
That's right.
They're going to be like, ooh, Kenny, you're going through this?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm ready to look at myself that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Like just today, she said, I was saying this person seemed uncomfortable. She goes, well, that's probably her thing, not yours. I was like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really true.
It's good.
But the reason I ask you that is you've got to remember you're going through transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And so you got to bring them along.
that's what I mean.
You got to cast that vision a little bit too, to go, okay, this isn't just a what, explain the why and show them the how.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you did this, but I just wonder if, because I would be the same way. And when we change, especially when we deal with transformation, it's like, this is what's happening.
Exactly.
And this is
Who
who
cares
I'm,
about that anymore?
this is who I'm becoming, and as a result, this is who we are going to be. And they're going, okay, that's really cool, but could you explain the how?
Right.
The why, buy-in,
Yeah. Oh.
and then show them the how.
And hopefully by sharing that with your team on their time, they're going to grow too.
Yeah, that's such a good word. Let's go over here.
You said earlier, I took this note, no one should be a leader who wants to be, and then you said famous, important, loved. And my story was very similar. Like you could have just put that right on top of my life, and it was the same childhood. And so the way it worked out for me is I didn't get what I needed, but I also got what I thought I needed when I did something important or when I did something impressive. So the way that turned out for me was getting really, really good at certain things early on. And then I ended up as a worship pastor, which is funny, age 19, no seminary degree, and I'm given a mic to talk about really, really important things just because I could play guitar or whatever. So I get promoted to this position, end up making better money than I would have if I got a degree or something. And then 16 years in, just realized more and more, like, this isn't working. I think I'm doing this for love.
Yes.
I'm doing this to get love. I burnt out, had to get on meds, and had to take a season out of ministry, but then ended up just leaving completely. One day, my daughter, who at the time, she was like 8 years old, she said, Dad, why don't you lead us at home like you lead those people from the stage? Oof. And it just went straight to my heart. And so that was one of the last straws where I'm like, I think I need to work on this. So I got out of ministry, going back to that original statement. Does every leader who is leading to get fill in the blank, love, importance, whatever, do they need to stop leading? Or is there a process where for that, maybe you're talking to the 8 years ago me who was still in that position, leading to get love? What would you say to him?
Before I answer it, and I think it'll be part of the answer, is do you know how good it is for us to share these things with other people? Share sounds like a soft word, but when, you know those Christmas cards? I hate them. Like, our family's perfect. And this is evil in the world. I don't mean they're evil. I mean, but it's evil to think everyone else is fine. I'm the only one who has problems. And when a person says to you, I went through this, this is how I went, it is a gift. And I'm sitting here listening to your story going, thank you, God, for that gift, because I needed to hear I'm not alone. And so when we do that, when we say, oh yeah, we're having a problem. I mean, you and I have talked about the stuff about our kids over the years, and that's how we bond. We are meant to be vulnerable with each other. Vulnerability, the word is rooted in the wound in Latin. And we share our wounds, just like Jesus did, like, hey, check this out. And so thank you for doing that. Yeah. You don't have to stop leading to do that. You have to stop, though, and say, I'm leading from the wrong place. Maybe you do have to stop for a while. Maybe you have to make a shift like you did. Good for you. But you do have to address the wound. And the problem with the wound is, if you have a wound that leaves you under an underpass, drinking a beer out of a bottle and in a paper bag. Okay, that's actually pretty clear that that's not working for you. But when your wound makes you do better music, give better preaching, please more people are like, good on you. So you do it more and more and more until you can't. And so what I would say is if anybody was listening to this and said, I think I got these, go back and find out and pause. You might not be able to afford to pause completely, but pause and say, I want to find out why I'm doing this. The last thing I want to say is, and I'm sorry, I don't have a pad of paper here, so I'm just trying to remember this off the top of my head. It's so interesting what you said, because if you're leading in order to get love or fame or any of that, it's all love. That's fear, because you're really afraid to live without it. Mm-hmm. But if you're leading from a place of love, you're not afraid. So when you're leading to get love, you're doing it from a place of fear. That's what I did. I finally figured out, like the candle that never got lit for me as a kid, I kept thinking, well, my wife will light it, my kids will light it, my staff members will light it, somebody's gonna light this candle. And I finally learned, like, oh no, when your parents don't light it for you, God will one day, but you just gotta mourn that and move on.
That's good.
So I don't ask other people to try to light the candle anymore. So anyway, that's an awesome story.
Incredible. And I gotta follow up with you. Do you mind sharing what led to 4 months ago you going, I gotta go get help?
You know, it was a series of, over time, things happening. My dad died, how long has it been now? 15 years, 17 years ago. And I went through a little thing right there. And then I was like, no, I'm okay.
Right.
And then every once in a while I was just getting older and I was like, I can't do this anymore. And I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
And then finally 4 months ago, my youngest son moved out of the house, empty nester. And we were moving, we were getting ready to move. And so all of my anchors were gone. And I think I was just like, okay, this is it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. It's so powerful. I want leaders and high performers. That's who this show is for. You don't have to be a big shot. It's not about status, but you desire to make a difference. But it is so important that we figure out. We talked about this with micromanagement, and it's led to us to some really interesting discussion. But this really is about who we're being, not what we're doing.
We're nouns, not verbs.
Yeah. And if you're not there, I'm telling you, I wish I had done it sooner.
Oh,
I don't know if you went through this, but I went through a season where I just wanted to go apologize to everybody. And I remember, and I was talking specifically about my oldest son, and I remember my therapist said to me, he said, hey, you've already apologized. And he said, don't apologize anymore. He said, just get healthy. Yeah. And he and everybody else will notice. And I was just like, what, really? Because, did you experience that?
Of course.
Okay, because we're wired very similarly. Because I was like,
okay, now that I know this, I gotta go tell everybody.
Right.
I didn't mean that.
Yeah, and my therapist goes, they already know.
Exactly. And here's one of the things I learned. This wonderful woman named Lisa Brennickmeyer told me, your kids are actually shaped by your limitations.
Yeah. Oh, geez.
I mean, because you didn't leave your kids. We didn't leave our kids without anything.
Right.
But your limitations are the things that actually help them become who they are. God knows what he's doing.
Right.
He uses these things.
Yeah.
But it's our fears of not being enough that we want to go make it right.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it's all right. You used one word right there at the end. You said, even if you're not a big shot. And this is probably, the most important thing, because I don't think greed and lust and all that thing. I think pride is the hardest thing.
It is.
And there's only one big shot, and it's not us.
That's exactly right.
And man, when you realize that, you're like, I'm so much more at peace.
Yeah. To grasp our infinitesimal, I don't know how you say that, infinitesimal smallness.
Yeah.
In the grand scheme of the universe.
Yeah.
We're specks.
Yeah. And yet wonderful specks in God's eyes.
That's right.
But we don't have to prove ourselves.
Yeah. Boy, that's true. So good. Well, I started off the show, as we start off every show, saying that this is a conversation designed for us to learn and to take something away. And I want to share with you so much that I have taken away from this, but the one big thing that I'm going to be working on in the days ahead is this idea of authenticity. I think we started out talking about a certain leader that way, but we ended talking about just being our authentic selves. And authenticity is, for me, it's showing up, not putting on airs, not trying to impress, not trying to be strong when I'm hurting.
Right.
That is authenticity. I think if we can all show up that way, we're going to be so much better people, which means we're taking a better version to work. And we're going to see the results of that, whether we're in leadership or not. So you take that, use it how you want. But also from this conversation, what did you take away? And what are you going to do with what you heard today? Because that's why we have conversation. Hey, if you enjoyed this episode and want to join us in the future in studio for a live recording, check out the link in our show notes for up-to-date info on guests, dates, and opportunities. Well, everybody that's in here, my friends, because you're my friends, I feel like we've been real honest. I didn't cry or snot, but it's good. But you're our friends, and as my friends, will you thank my friend Pat Lincioni for being with us?